and welcome to A Wealthy Life with me, Vicki. And I have on the podcast this week as my guest, Russell Quirk. You know, one of the things I really love to do with this podcast is to actually put a little bit of whoosh into your way of viewing things. And that's why I really wanted to extend the conversation that I had with Russell and to bring him back for a second week. And we get a lot more political in this conversation, really looking at entitlement and jealousy all the way through to the inabilities or deficiencies of MPs, but also looking at how the promise of the current housing minister and everybody else on how they're going to fix the housing crisis, which has gone well beyond crisis stage, why it's never going to work, why not the Labour government, nor the Conservatives before, nor Labour before that, and so on and so forth, are ever going to be able to solve the housing crisis. And actually, one of the things that Russell has actually done is write a paper on how it could be solved quite easily. The issue with it is that it would take 10 years to produce results, and no government minister is going to commit funding or put the effort in if they're not going to see the results within their lifetime. And it's this short-term thinking. Plus, the bulk of the housing, if 80% of the housing is being built by the large builders, Russell explains why that's never going to work either. So a really thought-provoking interview with Russell, very worth the listen. Make sure that if you haven't already listened, you go back and check out number one. And I've also got an exclusive interview with him inside the Wealthy Life community. So enjoy, buckle up, and I'll hand you over to me and Russell. Hello and welcome to another episode of A Wealthy Life, and I'm joined again by Russell Quirk. This is part two. If you missed part one, more for you. That means you're not subscribed. You need to subscribe. Go check it out. But in this one, we're going to go with all the P's, the perils of political pandering in the property sector. So I might only say that for once. Welcome back, Russell.
Glad to be back. Thank you.
Thank you. So we were touching on this before we were wandering into this stuff, because I know that you've appeared on, I've forgotten the channel name now. What's the TV channel that you appear on?
GB News, Talk,
yes,
LBC.
Yes.
Yeah, as both property and as a bit of a political pundit, actually now. Yeah.
Yes. Well, that's where I was picking up on this side here. And so if I do my political interview, so Russell, what makes you think that property is such a political football then?
Well, it undoubtedly is. I think we've seen over the last, goodness knows how many decades, countless prime ministers, chancellors, and housing ministers, housing secretaries, talking about the problem of housing, particularly house building, housing supply, whereby they create a headline which seeks to provide a solution either to the lack of house building or to the perceived problems in the PRS, as we talked about in part one. And I think that there's a couple of things going on with that. I mean, the first easy slight from my point of view on politicians is that they generally don't have a clue about the property market and housing supply, you know, the landlord-tenant relationship. They really don't. They tend to be very reactionary. I think it's very tempting as a new politician in post, let's say you're a new housing secretary, to tell everybody that you're going to solve, for instance, the problem of house building and lack of supply, and maybe take some advice and come up with a bit of a kind of policy or a vision, but they never think it through. And the outcome is that I think as a politician, bearing in mind politicians are genuinely and generally very, very selfish individuals. What they're looking for is credit, accolades, you know, back-patting, and above all, headlines to make it look as though they know what they're doing and they're competent.
And re-election.
Yeah. And because housing is such a big subject, right? It's a big subject politically, it's a big subject socially, in terms of, you know, homelessness, in terms of affordability, you know, new housing supply. It's a very tempting subject to seek to solve. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
if it's a big problem, along comes XYZ housing minister in her new post with her kind of big S, super,
Superman.
super secretary. I've got this, she says. Oh, okay, fine. So what are you going to do then? Well, I'm going to build more houses. Oh, wow. Okay, well, that's pretty much the same as every other housing secretary has said over the last 30 or 40 years. So my big question, of course, Vicki, to all of these politicians is great. Love the vision. Love the obviousness of the solution. How?
Yeah.
How? How, where, when? Who's going to pay for it?
Yeah.
What tenures? And all of a sudden, you start getting into the weeds of the idiosyncrasies of having to solve such a big problem as housing supply. And of course, the politicians crumble because they're not particularly, and here's the contentious bit, they're very interested in a front page headline on the front of the Daily Mirror or the Times or, whatever, saying that they are going to do this, they are going to invest X, they are going to build 1.5 million houses, as Angela Rayner is now saying, over the term of this parliament. I've got the solution. For too long, we've had a shortage of housing, and that's reflected on lack of affordable and social housing, and first-time buyers can't get on the first rung of the property. So it all sounds very grand, doesn't it? As a kind of soapbox speech. You just imagine Angela Rayner, Matthew Pennycook, who's the housing minister now, rather than just housing secretary as Angela Rayner is, but all the way back to the likes of, Grant Shapps and whoever else on the Conservative front benches, standing on a platform telling everyone they're going to solve the problem of housing because it's a big problem to solve, right? So they get the headline. The problem with politicians is that they want the credit during their tenure. No one, I'm afraid, this is a human nature thing, is going to go to the trouble of coming up with a genuine solution to the housing crisis, because the solution actually will manifest itself in terms of the result and the credit in 10 years' time.
Yeah.
And then Angela Rayner, Grant Shapps, Dominic Raab, whoever, they're no longer in post. So they do all this work knowing that the next or the next or the next person are going to get the credit. And I know that sounds like a very cynical thing to articulate, but I've spoken to many politicians that privately agree with me that that is what happens, right? So the solution is going to take 10 years. No one's interested because actually, and here's the really controversial statement, politicians couldn't give a toss about the country. What they care about is themselves, their kudos, their egos, and how much money they're going to earn after politics. And that's why. So it's a very easy and tempting thing to talk about, a very hard thing to solve. It's not going to be solved overnight. And therefore, and how I know I'm right, Vicki, is that I could take you back to a headline that was, I don't know, pick a year. I mean, any year, right? Any year in history, under Blair Brown, under Cameron, under Boris, under Theresa May, under, well, I can say under Liz Truss, but that was
no headlines.
Only lasted 46 days. I could find you an announcement or a headline under Blair Brown or Cameron from 2010, and I'll take you back to it, and it will have been received with fanfare by the politicos and the media. And 9 times out of 10, I guarantee those things were never done. They were never executed on. They were never implemented. The money, by the way, just gets recycled. When you hear about, £5 billion for social housing, we're going to spend 100 million to unlock brownfield sites. That's money that was probably announced 3 years ago, 2 years ago. It's the same money recycled. So the smoke and mirrors of politicians meddling in property and housing, it's a really pointless, fruitless, and actually really quite pathetic show, really. And the reason I'm right is because we all know that going back 20, 30, 40 years, we've all seen the headlines. We've never, ever seen an outcome because there never is one. And that's why we only ever build about 200,000 new homes a year. The other reality is that, so let's take the situation now in politics, which is Angela Rayner and her 1.5 million homes, which she is, really wedded to. I mean, in fairness to her, she seems very determined that that number would be built. But of course, it is just a number. It's just a statement. It's just a line, right? It's just, I could say by 2040, I'll be on the moon, right? And I can keep saying it as much as I want. Doesn't matter whether it's true or not, does it, to these politicians? They're just going to keep saying it as if it's true.
What are the actions that lie behind that? What else are you doing to get yourself to the moon?
Well, the obstacle is, right, we have this paradox, which is that the government seem to be responsible for the number of homes that are built in the UK because we need those homes for society's good and also for the economy, right? Because if you build more homes, that provides more jobs and more GDP growth and so on. There's definitely that. But the reality is Angela Rayner doesn't build houses. No one in the government does. No one in Whitehall, no civil servant picks up a trowel or a hod or a screwdriver. And actually no one in council world. So no councils, no council officers, no councillors. They don't pick up a hammer or a spirit level either, do they? Where do most of these houses get built? They get built by private sector house builders, and the majority are built by the top 10 house builders, the likes of Bovis, Bellway, Persimmon, Taylor Wimpey. All good companies, very profitable. They pay loads of tax. They employ loads of people. All brilliant as far as I'm concerned. But you can change the planning system and grab headlines and tell everybody that we're going to build 1.5 million homes all you like. House builders, I'm afraid, here's a reality check. House builders that build, let's say, 20,000 homes a year, like Persimmon does roughly. What Angela Rayner's target is for us to double housing output. So in other words, Persimmon have got to go from 20,000 homes to 40,000 homes, right? That's the logical conclusion of what Angela Rayner wants to do. Okay. So imagine now you're Persimmon. You're a publicly listed company. You have shareholders and you have an absolute focus on profit and your balance sheet. If you and your contemporaries build twice as many homes over the next 5 years, that volume increase, back to a conversation we had in part one of this, all of a sudden the supply increases significantly. What does that do to prices? It softens them.
Yeah.
So if I'm a shareholder of Persimmon at the next AGM, I'm going to put my hand up and say to the CEO, hang on a sec, you're going to build more homes. Does that mean we're going to make any more money and I'm going to get a better return on my shareholding? The CEO is going to say, well, actually, because prices are going to soften, we might get 10% less for each home. And obviously our costs will be the same. So hang on, why would we do that then? Why don't we just stick at 20,000? And that's what will happen, right? So because of a free market approach, which I'm generally massively in favor, by the way, of, we will end up with a situation where the big house builders, the top 10, they will not increase output because it's not in their financial interest from a profit and loss account perspective. It's just not in their interest to do it. So unless Angela Rayner is going to, I don't know, order them to, legislate that they have to, which you can never do, blackmail them, I don't know. If 80% of our homes are built by 10 builders and they don't build any more homes, you're not going to see any more homes, are you? It's obvious. So Angela Rayner can say and do and legislate and guide and dictate and rule all she likes. I'm telling you now, in 4 years' time, when you and I do a wrap up of, hey, how's this Labour government worked out for housing?
Yeah.
Let's clip this bit. I will eat my socks if Angela Rayner, inverted commas, or Britain has built 1.5 million homes in the preceding 4 or 5 years. It ain't gonna happen.
Unfortunately, that's the end of the conversation because I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you that just looking back, as you say, over history, all the promises, but that doesn't stop them fiddling. And there's a thing for me. So during lockdown, I spent a lot of time coming up with different government policies were I to rule the world, what I would do and how I would get people back into work. And this whole idea of no one thing is in isolation, because you've mentioned housing. It's needed for society. There's more of us. We need places to live, but also in generating and stimulating house building and the housing market, we employ people. But in order to employ people, we have to have educated the people. So you say you want to build the houses. Well, we've got to have the labour force to do that. And that would be great if we did. I know you said it's not going to happen, but let's just go down the line of if it did happen, what would need to be in place before that? Because if you want to go to the moon, then you need a rocket. So in order to build the houses, which we know aren't going to happen, but we could probably get some of the smaller house builders, which we'll come to, we need people with the skills to build houses, which means we've got to get people in colleges now on 1 and 2 year courses and get them out there working and doing apprenticeships or whatever else to bring the skills through so that we've got an increased labor force, that if the big builders don't use them, then the smaller private builders and landlords and conversions of houses into flats or whatever else can all be going on because we've got the skills there. So education has to happen down that line. The other thing is, I feel that in the housing market, the way that we have it now, what we're not factoring in is some of the demand is, yes, we're breeding more, but we're living longer. And that consequence of living longer means that we're not using houses in the way that we did with, like, my grandparents. So my grandparents lived somewhere in the 70s. They popped their clogs. That house was either sold or passed down to somebody in the family. And so there was all this churn going on. And now what we've got is older people sticking in the houses. Maybe there's a couple and eventually there's just one of them, and they're moving from their 70s into their 80s, their 90s. They're not always physically able to live in the properties that they live in because they're houses with stairs. Yes, there is a percentage of the older population that are still able to, poodle on upstairs. That's fine. And we've got Stena stair lifts to fix that. But actually what we want is more age appropriate housing. And therefore, if we had, and this is where the government could come in, that the government actually funded decent housing for our older generation who've paid their dues, that they could then form communities. And rather than shipping them off from where they are, it's in every, not village, but in every town or every district, we had somewhere where older people could choose to come and live and would want to live there, because it would be like the American care homes. Whenever you watch them on the TV and they do these plays about people moving into care homes, they're like living in luxury hotels. There's nice activities. They never give the impression that an American older person's living environment stinks of wee. And my experience from when it was my great aunt right the way through to my mum, even my mum's expensive private home that we put in, there is that low level of odor of wee. That's not something that anybody wants to go into, that stinky chair. You want somewhere that feels luxurious, and we could be creating these. Then that would enable people to then, as part of you move through your housing evolution from, first of all, your 1 bed flat into your 3 bed house, to be able to come out the other end and choose somewhere. We'd free up that market, which means we could then reconvert all of those. So there's so much that could be going on.
Yep.
But there's no will from the government, because they're not interested in delayed gratification, and there's no interest from any organization that's got a shareholder that isn't going to get an increased profit out of it.
Yeah. And 5 years ago, I wrote an essay called Help to Build. And I thought, and have been for years, I thought long and hard about how to help to solve the housing crisis by way of supply of homes, right? And there's a number of factors that constitute the housing crisis. I mean, not just volume of build, but where they're built, because obviously you have to build the right homes in the right places. Tenure, very important, and so on. Anyway, I wrote an essay that was based on my experience as an elected councillor in my hometown of Brentwood. The council leader at the time was Brandon Lewis, who then went on to be MP for Great Yarmouth, and he also became chairman of the Conservative Party and, fun enough, housing minister, amongst other things. He was also cabinet secretary for Northern Ireland. And under kind of his tenure, I suppose, he was very, very good indeed at appointing chairman of committees and just saying, right, not going to micromanage you, get on with it. So I chaired the planning committee for a while. I also chaired a thing called the Asset and Innovation Committee, where I was tasked with looking at all of the assets that were owned by Brentwood Council, all of the public assets, all the bits of grassland and the woods and the buildings and so on. There were dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of them. And then that can be replicated across the whole country. So I came up with a plan, which then formed the kernel of an idea for Help to Build, which is effectively to use the large swathes of unused public land and buildings to furnish then demand in those areas for both social and affordable housing, but also what I would call ordinary retail housing. But for the public sector, under the guise of a corporation. So let's call it the National House Building Development Corporation or whatever. That would be tasked with a CEO and a COO and a CFO with actually executing on my plan. Now, I showed that to several politicians, both in the Conservative Party and over the last 12 months in the Labour Party. Now, I know I would say this, but it's 5,000 words long. It is the solution to the UK housing crisis. I mean, it is. I defy anyone to look at it and say, but that won't work, that won't work. It's self-funded. It makes profit, but also provides social housing and affordable housing and also resale housing, the right tenures in the right places. It is, even though I say so myself, quite a clever hypothesis. I can't get a politician anywhere to advance it or put it into place. Why? Because it would take 10 years. So we're back to the kind of delayed gratification bit. Okay. And I was talking to a political commentator who's on the left of the political spectrum recently, who's very connected to the Labour front bench. And I said to him, I can't get my head round how, on the one hand, we're hearing from politicians that the new lot, the new government, we need to solve this. We need to build more homes. Here's the solution. And yet you wave it under their noses and they go, oh, no, well, it's just too protracted, too complicated. We'll just stick out a couple of headlines saying we're going to build 1.5 million homes. And then we're back to 4 years down the line. We would have built, I mean, let me tell you how many homes we'll build, right? So, by the way, we are on target in 2024 to build 170,000 homes. So the government would have been in place for 5 months, 6 months. The target of even 300, even though it's now been elevated to 375, we're going to build half of that in their first 6 months, right? So they're already playing catch up. I wager that during 25, 26, 27, 28, so that's 4 years, we will build barely 800,000 homes. We're going to end up building a half to two-thirds of Angela Rayner's target. And we'll look back and go, oh, okay, well, that's a bit of a shame. It's because of this black swan moment. It's because of this bit of politics. Oh, it was because of this invasion. I mean, we will make multiple excuses in 4 or 5 years' time. But now look back, that's what we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We've been doing that since the 60s.
So nothing will change?
No, and I'm afraid I can't see how it will when you've got politicians that are only interested in taking the credit. This scheme of mine helped to build, Angela Rayner could announce it and, it would be received well, but there's no data, there's no metric proven, there's no success metric, probably apart from a little bit of a progress update for the next 5 to 10 years. And that's the problem with it. So I'm afraid it won't ever be solved. And all the while, and I don't want to get into a kind of, a reform type debate about immigration, but we now, by the way, as a UK population, about the same amount of people are born every year as die, right? So that we're at parity for the first time ever, right? We used to have a growing population based on more people being born than dying. Now people are living longer, and also our birth rates dropped. But we still have a population that's expanding last year, for instance, by 900,000 people. In Rachel Reeves' budget on October the 30th, hidden within that is a proclamation that the population of Britain will get bigger to the tune of 2 million during this parliament. So we acknowledge we've got 2 million more people coming into Britain over the next 4 or 5 years. Where are they going to live? So even if we build 300,000 homes a year, that's just about enough to house an average family of 2.5 people. So if 900,000 people come in every year, I mean, roughly that's about 3 to 350,000 homes needed, right? So we're not going to build that many for all the reasons that we've set out. So let's say we manage to build 200,000. So we're going to be at deficit based on the fact that we've got more and more people coming into the country. The country, and I haven't even got onto the infrastructure around hospitals, schools, GPs. That's maybe a sidebar. This country over the next 4 or 5 years, based on housing and population increase, is going to break. There is absolutely no way that it doesn't. There's no two ways about it, because we know that the population is increasing by 900,000 people a year, and we also know we all know that we're not going to build sufficient houses, and even if we did, that only caters for the people coming into the country. Let alone the fact that, to your point earlier, not only are we living longer, 20-something% of people now live alone. So you've got something like 23% of houses have got one person living in them, whether they're elderly or they're single or whatever. So you've got people getting, older. So we're definitely getting older as a population. Positive, as in numbers, positive net migration, plus single occupants. So demand is going to keep increasing. Supply won't increase at pace enough. So what does that do to house prices and rents? 3, 4, 5 years down the line, up, up, up. So you and I are sitting here talking about this being the case, right? It's a natural kind of prophecy, isn't it? A logical extrapolation of what's going to happen. I can see it, and I'm just a gobby Essex estate agent, Vicky. That's all I am. I didn't even go to university. I didn't even get A levels. I've got 2 GCSEs. I can see it. Why can't all the clever people in Whitehall?
I don't know, because they don't want to. Ultimately, they don't want to. And at the end of all of this, whose fault is it going to be that people can't get on the property ladder? Because not because house prices are too much, but who can't get on the property ladder? It will be the landlord's fault, because the landlords have bought all the houses and we've put up all the rent.
Well, and landlords will get blamed for rent increases, but landlords can't get more rent than the market dictates. So actually, it's the market that dictates rent, not letting agents, not landlords.
Well, but they never mention that bit, though.
No. Estate agents
summarise it to us.
Yeah, estate agents get the blame for pushing prices up. But look, I've been an estate agent on and off for 20 years. The reality is, if you've got one house for sale and 5 buyers, it doesn't matter what you price it at. You can price it at 100 grand or 200 grand. Someone will outbid someone if they want it bad enough, based on that ratio between supply and demand being out of sync. So the market, by way of buyer demand, dictates price, because if a house is 100 grand and buyer number 1 comes along and offers 100 grand, but then there's 3 other viewings, they all want it, well, guess what? Number 2 says, but I'll pay 105. Number 3 says, but I'll pay 110. That's the market finding its own level. The agent is legally bound to put all offers forward. So it's not the bloody agent's fault, it's the market's fault. And the market, and look, again, I'm a free marketeer, Vicky, I really am, but it's not helped by the fact that we are trying to solve a social problem in housing by way of lack of supply, using the free market and 10 companies, just 10 companies. We should get on to talking about one of my favorite subjects, SME builders.
Go on then. That's where I was going to go with you next. We drove around. I invest in the Northwest. We drove around in the Northwest. Just took a few extra days up there to make a holiday out of viewing properties as well. And one of the things I was reflecting on is that in the last 12 months, house prices have gone from me being able to easily pick them up at 125,000 to the same streets now being on the market for 160. And there is no reason, there's been no anything else other than the house prices going up because there have been less on the market and more demand, as you say, supply and demand, purely supply and demand. But that's an irrational amount of money. 125 up to 160,000. And then as we drove around the swathes, now I'm a big thing about not NIMBYism, we have a lot of that in my village here, but the green belt and making sure that we're not chopping down trees and taking away green spaces from children to live on and all play on and all that sort of stuff. We do need to have that balance there of keeping this green land that we've got, because otherwise if we kill all the birds and kill all the bees, then we might have houses, but we'll all starve to death. So there is plenty, particularly when you get round the edges of the countries and you're looking at docks and areas where we've had factories, all of that sort of stuff. There is so much empty, wasted, almost semi-derelict land that could just be reorganized. And all you need to do is a bit like, that puzzle game where you want to move a square round and you've got 8 squares in a 9 square bit, where you need to move one to move the other. if we took one piece of land and we rebuilt, let's say, more fit for purpose 21st century factory space that people need, and then we move them out of this shitty stuff that they're in that doesn't work with holes in the roofs, and we put them all over there, and then we rebuild, and we could literally jigsaw puzzle. The same with schools. We then take another piece of land and we rebuild the school, and we move all the schools over. When any builder builds a big plot, my feeling is, and we're going to come to your small builders in a minute, but we had a big development over in Uxbridge in West London. They took over the RAF land because obviously we're reducing all our armed forces. So they sold all that land off. Did they build a new hospital to cater for the thousands of people that this new housing would attract into the area? No. What about just the GP centre? No, nothing. And until planning then also says that we've got to provide the infrastructure to go with it, then those big builds, if they do happen, aren't helping. And then we come into your little guys, and that is where the solutions can be, because they can move faster and they can work on small areas, and they're not, yes, they want profit, but they're not paying shareholders.
Yeah. So the other obstacle with big builders, apart from the fact that they understandably they are at the behest of their shareholders, right? That's just the way that they are made. The other problem is land banking. Now, I've been at odds with several people over this, where people say, "Oh, this isn't a problem. This isn't part of the problem," right? Well, there's about 600,000 land plots, so plots that would be houses owned by those top 10 builders right now. 600,000, right? That's just a matter of fact, that are stored up, some with, some without planning permission, that the developers then decide to trickle out as and when they want. And again, they don't want to solve the housing crisis tomorrow by building an all 600, because you imagine 600,000 properties new coming onto the market in 2025. That would reduce prices, right? Which is what we need to understand about forget the headlines and the rhetoric and the social this and the everyone deserves a home and all that nonsense. There's an economic reality to shifting and pushing and forcing and manipulating that supply demand balance, right? So that's why developers land bank so much stock, so much plots. They are out there. There's a thing called strategic land purchase, which is the big guys will be out there buying stuff that they won't build on for 20 years. Might be Greenbelt, Farmers Fields, might be your brownfield thing by the docks. They also know, by the way, and this is part of the problem, that it's sometimes when it's complicated, particularly if it's a brownfield warehouse on the edge of town with not much of a road infrastructure, the planning process is going to cost them £1 million and take 3 years. Well, how is that attractive? Right. And you've got, and again, I'm going to be controversial here, my experience as a councillor and as a chairman of a planning committee and as someone that is involved in property and has been for many years, one of the problems with the planning process is not the process, it's the people. Planning officers can be the nastiest, most obstructive, most pedantic monsters you have ever come across. I have heard conversations in corridors between planning officers where instead of debating and considering the merits of a planning application, they're saying, why does that developer need so much money? Look at the car he drives. Why has he got to build 30? Why can't we just make do with 50? There's an agenda from some. Obviously, I'm not making a completely sweeping statement. I'm just saying that there are planning officers out there that are pedantic and obstructive and jealous. That is part of the problem. Then the other part of the problem you have is councillors sitting on planning committees. Some of them are morons. I'll just tell it how it is. Some of them are morons. I've dealt with them. I've seen them. I've been to various councils watching planning committees, and they're arguing over things that don't have planning merit. They're arguing over things where they're playing to the crowd to make sure that the 6 local residents that have threatened not to vote for them next time are sitting in the gallery waiting with bated breath for their representative to slag off that particular development that's badly needed up the road. But because John and Jane and Peter and Petra that live at number 17 and number 19 don't really want to see any more school traffic, really. That's what happens, right? You think I'm taking the piss, but this is the reality of what happens.
I live in a village. I know.
In our country right now, right? So that's part of the problem with the planning system and with big builders. Yes, land banking. Now, SMEs, so small and medium enterprise developers, the guys that are building 5 homes a year, maybe 20, maybe 30 homes a year, right? They are like sharks, but in a good way, in that they have to keep moving. They have to keep moving. So they don't land bank. They can't afford to, because they're probably funding their land purchase, funding their construction. They employ really good sparks, chippies, bricklayers, and so on. Many of these guys, by the way, the CEO of that business, I mean, I met one literally just a couple of weeks ago who builds 40 or 50 homes a year. He and his son still lay the bricks. So they've got a big business building millions of pounds worth of homes. I mean, nothing like the size of a Bovis or a Bellway, but they still lay the bricks. So you've got those guys that don't land bank. They buy a bit of land, tweak the planning as quickly as they can, albeit perilous, as we've said, and then they build the houses out and sell them, and then they move on to the next plot. They employ people, they pay tax, they pay VAT, and they're providing homes. Now, the SME sector has gone from about 50% of all builds in Britain to barely 20 or 30% of all builds in Britain. So that long tail, fragmented subsector of house building has eroded and been neglected. Now, what I want to see, Vicki, is a huge boost to SME builders. Now, I think they should have a lower corporation tax rate. I think that planning applications for SME builders should be fast-tracked and done via legislation, to the point that if a local council doesn't fast-track every development of less than whatever 20 units, it gets taken away from them and the government make the decision instead. That's the gun to their head. Then you end up with SMEs thinking, okay, I'm going to get planning permission a bit quicker. Well, I can be a bit more agile now. Maybe I could do 3 developments a year, not 2. A lower tax rate. Wow, that's an incentive. Well, wow, that means that I can make a bit more money, maybe invest in more land, more tools, more people. That is the way, one of the ways to get Britain building. And until we recognise that the SME builders, the hardworking, roll your sleeves up guys that started as electricians and bricklayers and are now overseeing, the building and sale of 30 or 40 homes a year, they're the ones that we should be encouraging. And not just because they don't land bank, but also just because they employ really good people. Then you'd end up with more demand. Those people would then take on more apprentices. I mean, what's not to like?
Nothing. Absolutely. I think it's incredible. Yes. And is that part of your help to build solution?
No, that's something I've thought of in recent months. Do you know, I think I should just be housing secretary. I think
yes, I made you housing secretary when you started to explain the help to build, actually. So in my imaginary government, I would definitely have you as help to build.
But I got thrown out the Conservative Party years ago for being outspoken.
Oh, did you? Fancy that?
I thought, well, but I thought politicians were supposed to speak their minds and
no,
not outrageous, not controversial, just outspoken. The Conservative Party, the party that's supposed to be the harbinger of free speech and democracy. So I was thrown out because this is probably an entirely different podcast. But one thing that political parties really don't like is free-spirited, free-thinking individuals that might actually speak their mind. And I'm afraid I'm one of those. If I was housing secretary under, I don't know, God forbid, Keir Starmer or a future Kemi Badenoch government or whoever, I'd be seen as far, far too risky, because I might actually do and say things that were true and a bit uncomfortable. So, yeah.
No, we've sat in on many a council meeting in this area and watched how basically everybody in the room is told what they're supposed to say. You can hear it when you are aware when you're aware of what a council wants to achieve and the rules go out. It's yes, I'll back off there because I should get myself in trouble, and I've already had a few clashes with our local council already. So
loads of examples. I'll give you a very, very quick example. I'm doing a bit of planning consultancy work on a skip yard site in Brentwood. It's 3 acres and it's full of domestic waste and has been for about 30 years. Before that, it was a pig farm. It's got some buildings on it. It is disgusting. It's a disgrace, and it's in a village called Navestock Side. We put a planning application together where we're going to clear the site, and build 9 really nice big houses on it, overlooking the golf course behind, Stapleford Abbott's golf course, and clean up the site, regularize the site. It's greenbelt, and the planning officers have come back and said, refused. And we said, would you rather have the toxic waste then, and the skip lorries going up and down the road 35 times a day? Basically, yes, because it doesn't tick the box. So look, yeah, there are all sorts of problems with house building, supply, the process. And I think we've already characterized most of them, but that gives you an example of how ridiculous, how stupid it is. And actually, it's the one thing I agree with Angela Rayner on. And albeit I'd love her to build 1.5 million homes. But and you and I might fall out over this, Vicky, the reclassification of little bits of the green belt that aren't green, to me, is common sense. Now,
oh no, I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah,
but
I
your
don't
skip
mean
yard. You just said that's a skip yard, and you said it's green belt.
Yep.
How can that be green belt? That's not green belt.
Yeah, because it's
and how could
in
it
the green belt.
But how could it even have been allowed to change into that? Because that's not what the green belt is.
Oh no, because a lot of these places, like some industrial estates and so on, they were there before the green belt was introduced in the late 40s, early 50s. But council officers, if they want to be pedantic and have a bit of power, because if you're on 35 grand a year as a council officer, it's probably the only power you've got in your life. Then you can make the decision to say no because the book kind of says so. So the new national planning policy framework that Angela Rayner released back in December, given when this is going to go out, that provides that grey belt should be considered developable if it's already been developed and got something on it, whether it's waste or whether it's building. But of course, there's no real detail over that. But the councils will fight that because the officers want power, but sometimes the local populace, they don't see the bigger picture upside of having houses there. Now, fun enough, this particular site, all of the local residents are for it, but I couldn't get the local councillors to intervene and take the thing to committee because they were told by the officers that it was inappropriate. Now, the last time I looked, and this is a message to any councillors that are watching this or listening to this, as a councillor, you trump council officers. It's the officers that get told what to do by way of policy by the members, by the councillors. But in most councils, councillors just do as they're told by the officers. It's the other way round, actually, is what can happen. Anyway, that's just my little scenario. It's extremely frustrating. So basically, those living down Murthering Lane in Navestock, I'm afraid you've got another 20 or 30 years of a rat-infested, stinking mess on your doorstep because local councillors and Brentwood Council planning officers didn't have the balls or the intelligence to do the right thing.
Well, maybe this piece of planning legislation from Angela Rayner will make a difference and we'll put a shove in that way. Maybe what you need to do, here's a challenge for you. So you've written your essay. Okay, that's good. We need to write up the one about helping SMEs. That's part 2 of the Help to Build essay. My challenge to you is to get Angela Rayner to use your plot as an example of grey belt.
Yeah. Well, we've resubmitted the planning application now. So
CC Angela Rayner. Say,
Well, we'll see what the recommendation from the officers is. I suspect because there's just such a pedantic bunch at Brentwood in particular, not just Brentwood, I mean, all over Britain. If they recommend refusal again, well, yes, I think we will take it to Angela Rayner's doorstep. Yes.
Now that would be good. And then you can come back and tell us about how you've changed that and set a precedent. That would be brilliant.
Yeah. Good idea.
So we've got this thing. I think we've done half an hour on just that one question about political football. So we've got the whole idea that it's all about the headlines. It's about no energy behind anything because for real success, it's going to take longer than the one political term. We need to rethink things. Are we missing anything else? So we could go back now and we could go, okay, I don't think these are things that we can fix because some of them are to do with the individual thoughts of the MPs, right? But let's say that we could re-brainwash them into thinking right. So that the whole idea is that if you become an MP, you're there for the good of the people that you serve. And the fact that the thing that you put into place is going to take longer than your term, you're prepared to do it because you have long-term thinking. We're not going to be able to fix shareholders. I've worked hard and I cannot work out how to fund business without shareholders, because shareholders tip the priority of any business decision in that
Well, they
you've
own
got
it.
to,
Yeah.
yes, in the fact that you've got to not pander, but in a sense, pander to the people that own it. And I haven't quite worked out how to fix that. Therefore, we're going to go down and we're going to change planning regs and we're going to make it easier for the smaller businesses. I still feel there's probably a bit here because we've done a lot about building, but what about mucking about in the private rental sector? So over the last few years, we've had, first of all, the whole Section 24, which forced everybody into limited companies. My issue with any piece of legislation is the retrospectiveness of it. I didn't have a problem with bringing in Section 24 if it came into effect today and then that just affects all future purchases. But it's the fact, as you said, I think this might have even been in episode 1 of our conversation, that a lot of people have 1 to 3 properties, and what they've done is they've taken their personal spare money, and instead of putting it in a bank, they've put it into a brick bank, they've invested in property, and that is their pension. And when you fiddle, you're taking away people's pensions. So you think that you're being clever as an MP, but actually what you're doing is you're putting more people back into relying on the state, because now they haven't got the private pension that they thought they had. And I feel, and I don't know what political persuasion this makes me, but I feel that if we supported people to take themselves out of things that the taxpayer has to pay for so that they become self-funding, and that means private education, private health, private pensions, then that puts less pressure on the taxpayer purse. And the government then sits there and simply supports the people that can't provide for themselves. And I feel that that's I really wandered off. Come back, Vicki. Come back from the edge. Back here. Back to the landlords. So if there are lots of landlords out there that potentially started out investing in property because they were thinking of their pensions, that wasn't my driving force to start with. Mine was simply to buy houses because as a single parent I'd been put up, and then I thought, well, this is a better way to use my money, and I went down that route. But whatever the driving force, whether it's your pension or a desire to house the homeless, to then actually be in a position where we are seen as a valued part of the solution. Where are we going wrong here? Not
Well,
us, the government.
Yeah, we're back to perception again, aren't we? I mean, I don't want to get too political, but you can't change.
Go on.
Well, you'll never change the mindset of a political party that hates landlords because they feel that they're rich and nasty. You're not going to change the perception of landlords by way of the public and the media when the government that is left-leaning has already set out to demonise landlords. Whether that's with the Renter Rights Act or future tax imposition, we're never ever going to solve that.
But you're a PR company. There's the property, proper property and the whole PR part of it.
Yeah, but we're talking about PR for an entire sector, right? So if the PRS could engage my firm, proper PR, to do a job, I mean, yes, great. We could come up with a very interesting and compelling plan, but that's a big job. So we would need to come up with multiple case studies, messages, and content, data and research that proves that landlords are helpful, important, necessary even, and nice people. We could do that. But that would take a concerted effort by someone. I guess, look, the NRLA, obviously where we met actually at the NRLA conference in Birmingham, run by the brilliant Ben Beadle, that they do a really good job of being out there and visible on behalf of landlords. You know, they're a kind of an education platform. They guide on compliance. But one of the really good things that they've been fabulous at, actually, at the hands of Ben Beadle over the last 2 or 3 years, whilst the whole Renter Reform, Renter Rights Act thing's been going on, is lobbying. So there's a job being done, I suppose, but the wider PR job to make landlords look as good as they genuinely really are. I mean, that can be done, but that's a huge project, and it would need a number of people to come together and want to do it, really. And I don't think that's one of the problems with the property sector, not just landlords, but also estate agents and letting agents. It's a very fragmented industry, very fragmented. You know, as we said, 3 million landlords, there's 18,000 estate agents, God knows how many thousands of letting agents. Everyone's kind of, you know,
in their own little silos.
Yeah, and they're solo. There are organisations. There's Arla. There's, you know, Property Mark, stroke the NAA, and they all do a pretty good job, I think. But you know, for a message to really be advanced that changes the perception of landlords can be done. Big ask. You know, and from our point of view as a PR firm, that would engage a lot of resource. So thinking, outreach, writing, you know, I mean, there'd be a cost to it, frankly. So I'd love it to be done. You know, you'd get particularly the left-wing media, so the likes of the Daily Mirror and the Independent. Why it's called the Independent when it's really not independent, by the way, I don't know. They would go to war because it would be a lovely battle for them to try and negate the positive landlord message, because, of course, they have got militant tenants and militant tenant organisations as part of their demographic who, I mean, honestly, Vicki, I think they're just jealous of landlords. You know, they don't see why they should have to pay rent for nothing, you know, for no benefit, and landlords are getting rich off their backs. Well, of course, we all know that's not the case. You know, landlords aren't getting rich. Landlords are paying for their buy-to-let mortgage. They're paying off the deposit, the stamp duty. They're paying the maintenance of the property. They're paying tax on what they earn. They're paying capital gains tax on the property that ultimately they sell. So, you know, the illusion that landlords are, you know, this again, I used the phrase earlier, pantomime villains that, you know, are in some way fleecing tenants. I mean, you know, look, do you know what my message to tenants is? If you don't want to be a tenant, don't be. Either buy or shut up.
Yeah, or move back home with your mum and dad.
Yeah, do what you want. Live on the streets if that's what you want to do, but stop moaning that you're paying too much rent. Stop moaning that you can't buy a house. Yeah, maybe give up those avocado sandwiches, and just suck it up. You know, I said to I was on a radio show the other day, and the person I was talking to, she'll remain nameless, was again moaning about, you know, lamenting about first time buyers. And I said to this particular TV show host, and there was another guest on as well, and so it was me against two. I said, do you know what you might need to do, guys? And I said, what? I said, if you're worried about the fact that in your 30s, you haven't yet bought a property that you seem entitled to, do you know what you should do? Work harder. And they looked at me and went, what? I went, work harder. I said, it's not beyond the realms. I said, because 400,000 people a year are buying, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's, I'm afraid it's, they're all part of the demonization, right? So if you sat the same people down and talk to them about landlords, they say, yeah, landlords are horrible, aren't they? Well, when was the last time you met a horrible landlord?
Yes, where's the evidence?
I can't honestly remember meeting a horrible landlord. I did sit there with a landlord on a panel the other day, Richard Blanco it was, who was telling us how he didn't have the heart to put a poor single mum's rent up, and he was getting probably 2/3 of what he should be. And I've heard that story from multiple landlords over the last few weeks and months. Guess what? That's not being reported in the Independent and the Mirror.
No. We have a thing in this country where anybody who's successful, we like to knock down. And if anything goes wrong in our lives, we like to blame somebody else for it. And I think that the sooner we get back to I'm not saying this is a particularly a good thing, but I was just saying this with some friends at the weekend after we'd had all those flavored rums that I'd mentioned in a conversation we
Dangerous.
had before this. Yes, dangerous. There was a time when uh Britain, Great Britain, England, we were out there conquering countries and we were this empire creating. And I'm not saying that's good because obviously we
We're
had all
supposed
the.
to be ashamed of that now, Vicky.
No, I know, and I'm not being very woke, but I'm just trying to show the two
Good.
differences is that we were out there conquering places and now we're scared to say boo
Yep.
to anything. It's and everybody's a snowflake. Oh, don't, I'm so individual, and oh, it's too hot, I'm melting, whatever it is. Get a grip. Where is the thing that we are proud of in this country? We moan about the weather, we're miserable all the time, we hate queuing, but we do it. And it's everybody else's fault. And I've probably switched off all my viewers. I didn't mind if you switched off all the listeners because I could blame you. It was great. No, I have thoroughly enjoyed this, but I'm probably going a little bit too up the extreme end here. But I just feel like, come on. If you're not happy with where you are right now, whether it's where you live or the job that you've got or the finances that you've got, you can do something about it. And like you said, to those two people that you were on the show with, if you can't afford to buy a house, get a second job. That's what people did.
Yep. Well, it's what I've always done.
Ah,
Yeah. No, it goes back to the whole entitlement thing, and I think that's where society has changed. If you look at some of the most famous entrepreneurs, the likes of Elon Musk, and in this country Richard Branson, and you know uh, uh, Caldwell, and whoever, Alan Sugar, he's a good example. They all come from a place of adversity. So they could have decided not to work that hard, not to try, and above all, here's the thing, not to take risk.
mm,
But they have, and they've fallen over, and they've made mistakes, and they've had some failures. We all have. Um, but they've learned from that, picked themselves up, and become successful. The thought that someone should be jealous of that effort and that
mm,
outcome, that success, it just drives me nuts, frankly. And
mm.
whether it's in a housing context or otherwise, someone sitting there on X, Twitter, whatever it's called this week, slagging off someone that's successful just because they themselves are not, and they're jealous. The politics of envy,
Mm.
because they've got a bigger house or they've got a business or whatever. I think that is a really sinister, sad, and actually really worrying trait now, that you hate people that are successful, even though you want to be successful, but actually maybe as a 25-year-old, you think your route to owning a home and a 911 and having Caribbean holidays is to get on Love Island or X Factor,
Yes.
or to
Oh,
do a stupid rap in your kitchen and it ends up getting 5 million views on TikTok. I
oh,
mean,
I know.
just get over yourselves and roll your sleeves up, go out, work hard. But sitting there in your mum's spare room on your phone doing stupid things on TikTok because you're jealous of people that are more successful than you, yeah, that doesn't cut it for me, I'm afraid.
No, I know. I know. And there is this conversation, isn't there? Like I've got two grandchildren now, and the jobs that they do won't have been invented yet. I do hope that it's not some sort of social media influencer. We switched off the TV the other day, a film that we were watching, and we came back to regular telly, and it was what was In the Jungle. And one of the people, you don't know who anybody is anymore. And we
No.
Googled who it was, and they were some sort of Instagram
I
person.
know. Yeah,
And
a
it's just,
YouTuber.
yeah,
Yeah,
and this is
YouTuber.
just, there's a little bit of me that goes, for the early adopters, right? This is the difference. For the early adopters into something new, that's where your risk is. That's effectively what Branson and Lord Sugar and all of those people have been. They have been early adopters of something risky. And the fact that they have been able to get the attention of advertisers and that's created revenue and they've made money out of that, absolutely amazing. A couple of my clients that I source property for, they are influencers. They're based out in the States now. And, when I'm having a conversation with them that said, how much do you earn? And I won't say. And I went, oh, and I was thinking, what, a year? And they went, no, that's a week. And it was like, oh, okay, fair enough. Just rejig my brain to have a vague idea of what your world is like. Congratulations. But the fact that we then now have a whole tranche of young people that don't want, inverted commas, an old-fashioned person like me's proper job. What they do is they're aiming for social media. You're too far behind the curve. I'm not saying you can't be it, but there are so many trying to be that now.
You can't all be it.
Yeah, that's like being an actor of the old days. What you need to be doing is working out what's the new trend if you want to do something. Where's it going to go next? What can you move on to? Rather than, again, coming from maybe a more negative place and going there. So we started off with a question about property being a political football, and have ended up with social media and
slating millennials for being too entitled.
Entitlement and jealousy. Oh, maybe that's a good title there. So we'll look at entitlement and jealousy.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of it. Let me just give you another example. Look at the and I'm not a massive Trump supporter, so I don't want anyone to get carried away with me advocating Trump, but he has already been elected. He is now going to be 47th president of the United States, whether you like it or not. But if you look at the people that he's putting together in his inner circle, his cabinet, the likes of, him and Rogan and Elon Musk and so on, you look at their combined business experience, and then you flash over to the UK Labour government front bench: Starmer, Cooper, Rayner, Streeting, Edwards, Reeves. Look at their combined business experience. It's literally 0 years.
Yeah.
0 years, right? So when it comes to running a country, I don't think running a country seems that different to running a business, right? You've got various departments, you've got people, you've got overhead, you've got to maximize income, you've got to be efficient, there's a PR element, blah, blah, blah. Who do we think might be, and this is a left versus right argument, right? So those on the left say Starmer's brilliant, Yvette Cooper, Rachel, they're great, they're fixing the country. Well, they're not, because what they're going to do is spend, borrow, spend at the expense of people like landlords, pensioners, farmers, and so on, and business owners in particular, who will then ultimately stop paying into the system, either because they'll work less hard or they'll just sod off to Dubai, which is already happening. So you've got that dynamic here where we're basically going to spend more money than we've got, big deficit, recession, big problem. Or the US, where I suspect their economy now is going to absolutely fly, because the economy will be run by people that understand economics, proper economics. I don't mean
textbook, totally.
Practical. I don't mean Rachel Reeves economics or call center handling. I mean actual behavioral economics, the reality of consumer economics, and how the world really, really, really works. And frankly, say what you like about Trump, I'd rather be part of an economy that Trump and Elon Musk are running than Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves from a call center.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I was so, not to be political again, so against him. And when he started, and I mean all his attitudes towards women and as a woman, the rights over our own bodies and all that sort of stuff. There's so many things that are wrong 100%. With the man.
Definitely flawed. Yeah.
However, when he started, what I clocked this time, and bearing in mind he's done this before, but I obviously wasn't paying attention the last time, when he started naming his inner circle, and not so much Elon Musk, because that just seemed to be like a headline, but he started to name these other people. And although they're all deeply flawed and they've got cases against them for all sorts of other things, and they're all being knocked off for, the dodgy stuff they've done. You're right. Every one of them had real world experience of running businesses and, inverted commas, being successful out in the real world. And I absolutely did that piece that you just said. And I went back and I looked at not just the current Labour government, but also past governments. And I've said this all the way along. If all your job has ever been is to be an MP and that's it.
What do you know?
Exactly what do you know? All you've got, and as a former university lecturer, I used to teach stuff to people. If all you've got is the stuff that, for example, me or some other university lecturer taught you, and when I was a university lecturer, I'd not run a business. At least I'd had jobs, but I'd never run a business.
Unfortunately, a lot of these politicians now, what the thing they're taught and they're very good at is question avoidance.
Oh, yes.
towing a line. And that to me, I want to see conviction politicians,
Yeah.
Politicians that believe things and execute on those things, and actually, a bit of a Thatcherite thing, really, where, they have an ideology. They know not everybody's going to agree with it, but at least they'll stand by it. And when they get asked a question by Beth Rigby or Laura Kunsberg or whatever, they just say, look, you can disagree with me all you like, but I think this is how we solve immigration. This is how we solve crime. This is how we do this. What we get now from politicians is this professionalized avoidance of responsibility and questioning. That is a very dark and sinister thing. And actually, it's a bit like manifestos. I think manifestos should be contractually obligatory. So if you come into power on the basis saying we're going to do these 10 things, and then 5 minutes into power, you go, nah, didn't really mean it. We're not doing those things. Don't be silly. What, crime, immigration?
Yes.
Oh, no, we're not going to worry about those things. Then you should be prosecuted.
Yep. And we should get to re-elect. We get to vote again. No, I agree with you. Okay. So anything we have not covered under this political heading, just while we're piling all into this podcast, what else have we forgotten to say?
Well,
I think we fixed housing. We fixed SME builders, landlords.
Let me sum it up. Politicians are opportunists and generally incompetent. And those two things are the combination that is everything that's bad about particularly fixing the problem of housing. Have we missed anything? No, I don't think so. Or apart from, I mean, the one other thing I would add is that the civil service, in my humble opinion, is also dangerously out of control in terms of them having their own agendas. And, you need politicians, again, back to the conviction point, that say to civil servants, most of us will remember yes, minister, and yes, prime minister. Let me tell you from my experience of, being around a few people in Parliament and senior civil servants, and particularly being a councillor for 8 years, that is more real than you think. And, the likes of whatever his name was, Humphrey, deceiving politicians, manipulating politicians because the civil servants want either a quiet life or their own agenda to be enacted, that has definitely manifested itself. Definitely did under the Tories. I don't know yet about Labour, but regardless of avoiding questions, political footballs, rhetoric, and so on, that the other big problem we need to solve is the power of our civil service and how they are doing things that they want to do rather than what they should do under a mandate. Because, of course, civil servants aren't elected. They have no accountability, but they have loads of authority. And also, again, another controversial point, I would do what that wonderful Argentinian president Milei has just done and cut the civil service probably by 30 or 40%, a bit like Musk is about to do in the United States. And basically say, as a civil servant, if you're on board, if you're going to go with the elected mandate of this government, not your own agenda, but the elected mandate of this government, then you stand a chance of staying. If you want to cause trouble, work from home and be a pain in the arse and work slow, piss off, because you will not any longer have a job.
That brings in a piece where they did their own piece of research, didn't they, on productivity post the pandemic. And what they actually found was that people were working less efficiently by working from home, and that the organisation that was the most inefficient at working from home was themselves, the civil service.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, our productivity has dived over the last 4 or 5 years.
Horrendous.
Because again, it's a woke agenda that just wants to kind of cuddle everybody and fluff everybody, let everybody do what they want to do. The woke mind virus, as Donald Trump calls it, is a definite problem in Western society. Again, it's probably the theme of a whole different podcast, but by giving everyone the benefit of the doubt and being overly liberal, whether it be in employment, whether it be crime, immigration, or whatever, in my opinion, that has led to a softening of efficiency and discipline and standards that we desperately need to recover from.
Yeah. I think that's a good closing sentence.
There you go.
That very
There's
good.
your soundbite.
There's my soundbite. Russell, I could spend the rest of the day, but I know that we have to stop. We've got other things to do, but I could just spend days having conversations with you. I would
Thank you.
love to read your Help to Build essay. That would be awesome. I would be really interested. Thank you so much for spending time and coming back. I foresee that we will have conversations again. Let's pick another topic and pop back up again in another couple of months and
Yeah, I'd love to. No, and
stir
thank you.
everybody up a bit.
Thank you again for having me on for part 2. So no, it's been fun, and yeah, it feels like we're kind of putting the world to rights, doesn't it? It's good.
It does, and I think there needs to be a bit of that, a bit of straight talking, and of course, all of this is all our own opinions, but out of this, start conversations, and those conversations leading to things getting better. That's all
and
it can be.
we need to do it while opinions are still allowed. Because in 2 years' time, you might ring me and say, "Hey, Russ, you want to do another podcast?" But I'm afraid you can't actually say what you think.
No,
we're not allowed to do that anymore.
yes,
Opinion, discourse, debate, obviously goes without saying. This is a really it's a helpful but very necessary part of a democracy. I'm old-fashioned in it. I think I embrace the fact that people have different opinions and ideas and ideologies. I think that when it comes to being able to advance an argument about your own position, you should be able to do that convincingly and persuade other people that you're right. If you can't do that, then you might not be right after all. What we can't have is people not liking an opinion, whether it's on housing, crime, immigration, or whatever, and shutting down that person's ability to articulate that opinion because they don't like it. If you can't win the argument, then you haven't won the argument.
Correct. Yeah, you've not got the data, you've not got the facts.
But don't stop people speaking.
No.
But that is kind of where we're going, I'm afraid.
Yes.
Anyway, we've got quite political, haven't we?
Yeah, that's all right. I don't mind.
Anyway.
I very rarely get a chance to do that, so that's been good fun. Really good fun.
It has been good fun. I appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Russell. All the contact details and everything that you want to follow up on this, plus the links to the episode if you missed it last week, will be in the show notes. Russell, it just leaves me to say thank you very much again. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Hi. So I hope that puts some whoosh into your thinking about property investing and the problems that we face on a larger scale. And I think really understanding those economics are what's so important. So whether it's land banking, whether it's legislation, whether it's the shareholders of big developers, whatever it is, what we know for a fact is if everything stays the way it is right now, we are never going to solve the housing crisis. Even with our own birth and death rates in the UK, we have a deficiency, never mind net immigration. So we're going to have a problem. And what does that mean for us? That the property market is always going to be somewhere that is reliable. 2 reasons. One, there is always going to be a housing shortage, and that means that houses are always going to rise in price. And number 2, there is always going to be a shortage, and therefore there's always going to be tenant demand. So whatever you are thinking about, you know for a fact that investing in property is a long-term investment, but is actually a very sound one. So look forward to having further conversations with Russell later in the year. And I hope that you've enjoyed that episode, and I will speak to you again next week.